Good morning and good afternoon. My name is John Herbst, and I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. Along with my colleagues from the European Center, led by Ben Haddad, we are delighted to bring this event to you today. This event concerns one more peculiar episode on the European geopolitical scene. That's the Kremlin special operation that blew up explosives in Czechia in 2014. This incident is one more indication that Moscow's revisionist foreign policy endangers all of Europe. Even countries that have not pushed back hard against Kremlin aggression in recent years, like Spain and Greece, have been subject to Kremlin provocations. It's my honor today to introduce Foreign Minister Yakub Kolhanik, one of the bright young faces in Czech and European politics. Minister Kolhanik became a member of the Czech Parliament in 2011, a deputy defense minister in 2014. Shortly thereafter, he became a deputy foreign minister, and he became the deputy minister of Interior in 2018. In April of this year, he was appointed foreign minister. So congratulations, Mr. Minister, to you on your appointment, and we are ready to hear what you have to say about this incident.
All right, well, thank you so very much. And I suppose it's good morning to everybody, although we have some people joining us from Prague. So, well, hello, everybody. It's my honor to be speaking here at the Atlantic Council. Though I have to say, having fond memories of Washington, D.C., I wish this was all done in a physical form. But because of the COVID pandemic, we are all confined to this virtual space. Look, I am actually speaking to you from Bratislava, from our embassy in Bratislava. I was here for a meeting of Central European countries with Ukraine. Also, Ukraine is a country perhaps the hardest hit by Russia's aggressive behavior. However, I'm here to speak about the situation in the Czech Republic and what's happening in Czech-Russian relations. So again, thanks for organizing this event. I'm afraid I'm only able to give my opening remarks because then I am off back to Prague. So again, thanks for this, and I wish you a great discussion. I have a couple of things I'd like to say. My country, at the moment, is at the midst of a bitter diplomatic row with Russia. We do not intend to escalate tensions with Russia. However, the Czech government had to respond in a forceful and resolute manner. Because of the recent staggering revelation, our intelligence services and law enforcement agencies have recently established that the Russian intelligence services, or more precisely, the Russian military intelligence, GRU, was behind the explosion of the ammunition depot in the Czech Republic back in 2014. In 2014, two explosions rocked the small town of Vrbětice in the Czech Republic, killing 2 Czech citizens and causing great material damage. It took 6 years to clean up the area. Following meticulous investigation by our police and intelligence services, the Czech Republic, the Czech government was presented with the conclusive evidence that it was in fact the Russian intelligence operatives who planted explosives in the ammunition depot. We identified 2 Russian nationals, Mr. Anatoly Chapiga and Mr. Alexandrin Mishkin, as being involved in those attacks. In a short span of time, basically days, we had to master a response because these these two individuals were implicated in the 2018 assassination attempt on Mr. Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury, UK, and the 2015 assassination attempts against Mr. Gebrev in Sofia. In response to the shocking revelations, our government announced the expulsion of 18 Russian intelligence officers under diplomatic cover from the Russian embassy in Prague. Russia reacted disproportionately and aggressively. That left our embassy in Moscow, which obviously was much smaller, effectively paralyzed. Well, I decided to summon the Russian ambassador and told him in no uncertain terms to reconsider Moscow's decision. And I gave him time until the noon the very next day. Well, we have not received any word from Moscow. And then I decided to cap the number of the staff at the Russian embassy in Prague to equal the number of our downsized embassy in Moscow. The net result of this move was that we single-handedly reduced the number of Russian diplomats by 80. The relations between Russia and the Czech Republic have reached the lowest point since the Velvet Revolution. The relationship between our two countries had been tense ever since, but not like what we are experiencing at the moment. My single most important goal as a foreign minister is to make sure that all our friends and allies in both NATO and the EU are fully behind us. Well, me and my fellow colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have engaged in a frantic diplomacy. In a short span of time, basically a matter of days, we had received joint statements issued by NATO and the EU. NATO and EU countries have issued public statements supporting the Czech Republic. They have summoned Russian ambassadors expressing displeasure with Russia's behavior. Other countries have joined us in expelling Russian intelligence officers under diplomatic cover. For us, it is crucial that the West remains united in the face of Russia's growing assertiveness. Because we need to send a clear message to the Russian government that this kind of behavior is unacceptable. To sum up, Russia's behavior towards Europe is becoming more reckless and more aggressive than it has been ever before. Ukraine or Georgia, they're facing aggressive behavior coming from Russia. Those countries that have since then become members of NATO and the EU are targets of more covert forms of aggression. In his recent speech, Russian President Putin has said that Russia's response to all measures seen as hostile will be quick, tough, and asymmetric. And here I want to underline the word asymmetric, because there seems to be a doctrinal shift in Russia's foreign policy. This is a clear attempt to divide Europe, to divide the transatlantic community, to test whether we are united or whether some allies are more willing to compromise or to give ground. Or to put it in George Orwell terms, to be more equal than others. The transatlantic community should therefore act. It should send a clear signal, clear message to Russia that we stand united in the face of Russia's growing assertiveness. And not only out of solidarity with the Czech Republic or with Bulgaria, which is facing a similar situation, but also for the sake of our transatlantic unity and, above all, our transatlantic. I'm afraid I've got to run, but again, it was such a pleasure being able to speak here and share my thoughts on Russia and on what my country is currently facing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister and Ambassador Herbst, for this introduction. My name is Elena Kutsko. I'm Director of Globsec Policy Institute, also joining from Bratislava, independently from Minister Kolhanik. I'm glad to moderate this discussion and further dive into some of the issues that Minister has already outlined. We here in Slovakia are, of course, very deeply concerned about the developments in our neighboring country. And we're also glad to have Minister Kolhanik visit Bratislava. Minister, it was an honor to host you at Globsec last week, and I think frequency of visits does highlight the closeness of the connections between the countries in Europe, how intertwined our fortunes are, and how important and how influential are the developments in one country for the developments all around Europe. I'm very delighted now to introduce the panel of speakers to discuss the issues with us today. We have Ambassador Daniel Fried, who is Weiser Family Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council. We have Yakub Yanda, who is Director at the European Values Center for Security Policy. We have Ambassador Jaroslav Kurfürst, Special Envoy for the Eastern Partnership, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. And we have Laure Mondevi, who is Senior Reporter and Non-Resident Senior Fellow at the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council, but also the reporter at Le Figaro. We already heard the introduction from Minister Kolhanik, also summarizing what happened. But I would like to first follow up with Ambassador Kurfürst and develop further a little bit the explanation that the minister has provided. We heard that the relations between Russia and the Czech Republic are currently at the lowest level of their developments since the Velvet Revolution, and that the Czech response towards the explosion in Verbetice was rather strong. We also know that after that, Russia designated Czech Republic as an unfriendly country. Ambassador Kurfürst, why was the response so strong? Did you expect such reaction from Russia? And what is going to happen next?
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and good morning to across the Atlantic, and good afternoon to those who are watching from Europe. Well, the answer to your question is very clear. These 7 years which passed from the attack did not take away anything from this extremely aggressive and unacceptable character of this attack. If you take the GRU who was attributed with this attack, is a service of Russian army. So this was for the first time from Soviet-led invasion in 1968, when foreign armed forces unit attacked the territory of my country, the territory of a country which is covered by the mutual treaty on the friendship signed and ratified by Russia, the territory of member of NATO and the European Union. So it was really a very clear and brutal violation of international law, and also violation of civilized behavior between civilized countries. So that's pretty clear that the reaction from the Czech side was very strong. There is also another reason I would like to mention, because it was not an isolated event. Georgia and Ukraine, they have daily experience with this aggressive behavior. You have examples in London, Berlin, Sofia, Podgorica. I can name others. If you take into account also cyber operations or information warfare, then I can go basically through all the list of the membership of EU or member countries. So basically, the Czech reaction, the strength of the Czech reaction is quite understandable and clear. As Minister said, there was a very clear public attribution of the attack from the very high political level. The second step was the clearing of Russian intelligence presence at the embassy, 18 people expelled. So that was a really punishment for this event. The third step, there was the escalatory retaliation of Russia, and we reacted. in a way, maybe Russia did not expect. We capped the diplomatic presence on the Russian embassy in Prague on the same level of the people who remained at our embassy in Moscow. But I don't think it's the end, because there is the issue of financial and other compensations, which is still on the table. And definitely Czechia will be consistent in pursuing its strategic independence from Russia, be it nuclear power plant tender, be it energy security or other fields. And of course, the international solidarity here, as Minister stressed, this is something very, very important. And let me finish by one thought. From the point of view of reputation, Russian government or Russian state committed a suicide. It lost a sympathy of Czech society for many years, maybe for a generation. All the propaganda machine, all the vaccine diplomacy, and all the working with the proxy forces, etc. All this is now in ruins and is discredited. And I believe that to gain the trust and confidence, it takes hard work and a long time. But just let me conclude by this stressing of unity and solidarity of the allies and partners, us in the West. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for putting it into the broader perspective, but also highlighting the importance of solidarity. We will go into more details in a little bit, but I would like to go now to Yakub Janda and to stay for 1 minute longer with the Czech Republic. The Czech officials do not necessarily speak with one loud voice when it comes to relations with Russia. We noticed that, and we know that President Zeman, for instance, is at least somewhat sympathetic to the Kremlin and potentially not holding the exactly same line as the Czech government. Prime Minister Babiš, while condemning the Russian sabotage, also publicly acknowledges the importance of economic relations. How would you assess why and how these incidents will change the Czech policy towards Russia, especially in light of the upcoming elections?
I would like to add that you have to distinguish, we are looking from the outside to the Czech Republic, over who is actually running the policies. In the Czech Republic, the president is only a symbolical figure. He does have informal competences, informal influence. He has some constitutional competences, but in reality, it's the government led by the prime minister, which is actually deciding on foreign and security policies. So it is clear, and it's true, unfortunately, that the Czech president quite often sides with the Russian interests. That's the case we have, but I think what is clear to say is that the Czech government have actually acted quite decisively in expelling and limiting the number of Russian diplomatic and essentially intelligence personnel at Russian embassy. And honestly, myself, being critical, I have been positively surprised by the toughness of the Czech government's reaction to this incident. So that is good news. And what it will mean, what is the consequence to your question, Alena, is that first, Czech Republic has for a long time been used as a Russian intelligence base mainly against Germany. The number of Russian diplomatic personnel and intelligence staff with diplomatic passports have been over 130 before this incident. Now we are cutting them down to approximately 40, which is very good. So that's good for the allies, that's good for us as Czechs as well. Then the reaction is that there has been a long discussion, also pushed by the Czech president, over a nuclear tender, whether the Russian company Rosatom should be winning it. And now it's clear, even all of the government ministers are saying publicly Rosatom cannot build a Czech nuclear power plant because it will be a strategic dependency on Russia, which we cannot afford, which is good. That's good news. But then I think the big question is, how will the allies really respond? Because if you compare this case, this Vrbětice GRU attack on the Czech soil, and the 2018 Salisbury attack in the UK, and we are approximately 4 weeks from the public attribution now on Vrbětice, you could compare. And I think approximately there is about 5 countries, 5 mainly EU countries responding in expelling Russian intelligence personnel under diplomatic cover from their soil. Right now for the Czech case, for Vrbětice. But on the Salisbury attack, it was multiple countries and more than 120 individuals from Russia outside of the UK. So I think the reaction of the Czech government bilaterally has been quite strong, but so far the reaction of the allies as individual countries has been quite weak, despite the fact, which is good, that EU and NATO together responded formally very well. But the question is about our deterrence by punishment. So the question is, if the Russian government sees this, will they think again before they do it next time? And I'm afraid our joint allied reaction so far has been quite weak. So the Russian thinking would be, well, it's worth it. We might do it again and it's no real harm to us. And I think that's our core of our problem now.
Thank you so much, Yakub. What Yakub has highlighted, but also what we heard before, is that this incident in the Czech Republic is by no means an isolated incident. Over the past at least 10 years, but much longer, we've seen a series of provocations on the European soil. We've seen the interventions in the French and German elections, the Brexit referendum, incidents ranging from the attempted coup in Montenegro to assassinations in Britain and Berlin. And of course, we remember the poisoning of Alexei Navalny and his subsequent arrest upon return to Russia. I would like to go next to Laura Mandeville and follow up on this issue about the sufficiency of the Allied response to the incidents in the Czech Republic. From what you observe, do you see the changes of European policy towards Russia, and how would you assess the demonstration of solidarity by the European Union, but also NATO allies with the Czech Republic?
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel. I'm going to answer your question, but I wanted to start from saying that it seems to me that what we've heard today being described shows very much that the Czech Republic and maybe more widely Eastern Europe are in a way, and maybe the whole of Europe, but more particularly Eastern Europe, because they are former, members of the zone of influence of Russia, are in a way stuck between a resurgent and quite aggressive Russia, sort of a Czechist capitalist country, as I call it, and on the other side, so stuck between this Russia and the West, which is I would say, deeply divided and in a deep crisis, political crisis, and I would say even in some kind of existential disarray about the state of our democracies and what we are supposed to do with ourselves. And I think this is the context in which we have to look at what is going on with the Czech Republic. Why? Because indeed the Russians are seeing that, and they are using this very particular moment and this particular state of affairs in the West to push their game and do what has been just described. To go back to the question of the EU policy towards Russia, I would tell you that for me, I'm actually quite perplexed about what is this EU policy, because I frankly don't really see a EU foreign policy towards Russia. What I see is a huge mix of worry, perplexity, and disarray, and for now, sort of rhetorical support, but not much action to answer these different examples of destabilization that you've been talking about. So the one positive point that I see is that I see a growing agreement, a growing awareness of the fact that the Russian actions are unacceptable and that they are dangerous, and that's something which has seen some progress, because if people like me who've been following this story for quite a few decades, at the beginning of the Putin era and Putin coming to power, I think that quite a few countries, and among them, particularly, I would say France, my country, have been quite, illusioned and very, optimistic about the idea of sort of building up some kind of strategic relationship with Russia. And they really tried that. And the US tried and failed, I would say, miserably. I mean, every time you had a new president, let's say it frankly. And then, I think that, with times passing and very big crises occurring, like the Georgia crisis, the Ukrainian crisis, and then all these different very troubling incidents. First, Litvinenko, practically no response, and Skripal, then the Czech incidents, and many others that you've mentioned. I think there is this self-awareness, but there are two big buts for me. The first one is the divides, of course, because although the Czech minister has been, of course, stressing the sort of support that he got from EU and NATO, in fact, there is a lot of disagreement on what should be done. I mean, you have what we call the hot countries, mostly situated, I would say, on the eastern part of Europe, of course, a country historically very aware of a Russian threat and very much, I would say, attuned to any kind of signal coming from the east, Poland, the Baltic countries, now the Czech, which were more, I would say, more reaching out to Russia, as we've seen, but now very much, in full, I would say, worry. And then you have what I could call the sort of, it doesn't mean much, but the romantic realist, sort of a mix of what they see as realism and sort of romanticism of reaching out that we see with countries like France or even Germany. And it happens that these countries are supposed to be the big guys in the EU, the most influential ones, if one can say, and at least that's how Russia perceives them. And so that really, creates a big problem for the formulation of this policy, because there are disagreements. And when you talk to the French diplomats, they tell you we're not going to have a point of equilibrium in the defining these 27 countries' foreign policy on what Paul defined. It's impossible. We have to move the line in between. We have to find some kind of balance between outreach, sort of extending our hand, and being firm and very tough. So that's what we hear. And what is interesting is that the other point I wanted to underline is that we have no foreign policy of the EU as such. We have actually a problem of structural and behavioral weakness of the EU foreign policy, which is not only deals with Russia, with any topic of EU foreign policy, because the people in charge of this policy are in fact bureaucrats. I mean, they are not the representatives of countries with a might behind them. They are the representatives of 27 countries, which happen to have some common denominator, but sometimes this denominator is not even defined, or it's very narrow. So, and that means stories like what happened to Mr. Borrell, the representative for French EU foreign policy, who decided to go to Moscow, and who personally was on a sort of position of quite middle ground, I would say, position, which reminded me of the French position, in fact, which was, let's try to go back to some kind of, let's start again with Russia. I'll go there, I'll talk to them, we'll see what happens. And he arrives, as you remember, in February, at the very moment when Navalny is being imprisoned, and he doesn't realize, frankly, I mean, that's what the diplomats for different countries now say, that he's going to be in a very difficult game. And in fact, he, as you remember, he's sort of trapped in some kind of press conference with Sergei Lavrov, and Sergei Lavrov very skillfully, I would say, traps him in some kind of humiliating position where he sort of learns that some diplomats from EU have been expelled, and that Lavrov very bluntly sort of attacks EU at the moment when he's trying to extend his hand. And as a French diplomat told me, he extended his hand and he got bitten. So that's yes, I just wanted to finish to say that in fact the result of all this is that in fact we have a huge disarray, and the disarray I would say is global throughout the West. I think it's there in Washington, and despite the expression of toughness coming from the Biden administration, which in a way is a good thing, you see also you see this sort of perplexity everywhere you ask diplomats, you ask experts about what we are supposed to do with Russia, and we can go back to understand why is it so difficult to deal with this country at this moment.
Thank you so much. That naturally makes a connection and brings us to Ambassador Fritz. Ambassador, Laura outlined the European policy towards Russia, or rather lack of it. So the European countries are in disarray, which in itself probably highlights the success of Russian policy towards dividing European allies. But Laura also mentioned the reactions of the American side to the issues. Ambassador, you personally have spent a lot of time in the region. You're on the side of the small guys, if we're using Laura's classification. Do you also agree with the statement that there is now more realization of the dangers that Russian policy brings in all its hybrid capacities? But also, could you comment on the transatlantic solidarity in response to Russia?
Thank you. To answer your question clearly and succinctly, yes, there is greater realization on both sides of the Atlantic of the problem that Putin's aggression poses. So I like the way our Czech colleagues have framed up the problem. From the foreign minister, Yakub, Jaroslav Purfus, they're right. And I like the way Laura Mandeville has framed up the strategic challenge as well as the way she framed up the problems and weaknesses. But I'm an old policy guy, and my instinct is to figure out what we do with the assets we have. And here I am relatively optimistic. The center of thinking in Europe and the United States, but especially Europe, has been shifting in a tougher direction with respect to Russia. Policy has not caught up with that. So let's be clear. And of course, Laura Mandeville is right. There are a range of views. And if you want quotes of various foolish people in Europe, and for that matter in the United States, it's not hard to assemble. But the center of gravity has moved. I mean, the French used to speak of outreach to the Kremlin in the first place. Now they speak of a two-track policy, resisting aggression and outreach. That's a big shift. In Germany, you have the Greens, who sound, quite frankly, they sound like the Poles when it comes to Russia. And they may emerge as if not a member of the coalition, maybe even the leading member of the coalition after the elections. Again, it has not translated itself into policy. But here's a second reason I'm relatively optimistic. The EU policy framework for Russia that has existed formally since 2016, the 5 principles, right? Remember that? Is actually not bad. It's actually not bad. It puts Ukraine in the front and center. It recognizes there's a threat from the Kremlin. It talks about cooperation, but it doesn't allow cooperation to dominate the dialogue. And that's from 2016. Now is a good time for Europe and the United States, with the Czech Republic playing a significant part, to discuss, coordinate, and come up with a consistent Russia policy. We can do this. We can do this. The Czech Republic has asked for solidarity. Now, there has been some immediate diplomatic solidarity, and the foreign minister mentioned it. There can be, as a former diplomat, there can be some solidarity helping out the Czechs in Moscow, informally. Friendly embassies, either Visegrad embassies, EU member states, may be able to support the Czechs, especially when it comes to certain consular issues, in an informal way. But the real way to express solidarity with the Czech Republic is strategic. We need a stronger policy toward Russia on both sides of the Atlantic. What does that stronger policy consist of? Well, like I said, an old bureaucrat, I put things in, I'll define it as 4 pillars, okay? 4 pillars. One, the most important right now, is resisting Putin's aggression across the board. It's not just the Czech Republic Putin has contempt for. He despises us all for our democratic values and what he considers our democratic weakness. Recalling let us say, the anti-democratic movement in the 1930s. He despises us all. We need to push back on his aggression, whether it is in Ukraine or against NATO member states or against the British or the Czechs, using subversion. We need to be prepared to push back, to expose it, shine a light on it, take action in solidarity. That may be sanctions, but it also may be efforts to dry up channels of corrupt Russian money flows. Why should they be able to use our own system to hide their investments and hide their ill-gotten gains? No, we're all guilty. The United States too. We're beginning to fix it, but we've got a long way to go. Don't let them invest in our real estate anonymously in London or New York or Miami. Don't let them invest anonymously in our companies. And this is not anti-Russian, it's good governance. And develop common standards. So push back. Secondly, sure, cooperate where we can, but don't pay them for that cooperation with premature concessions. If, for example, if Lavrov said he'd love to cooperate on the Arctic, but how can I do that when you're arming the Ukrainians? A very simple answer, no deal, Sergei, no deal. Cooperate where we can, but don't pay them for it. A third is stabilize the relationship, which is not the same as cooperate, which means frank channels of communication about where we might work together and where the Russians can expect strong resistance. And a fourth pillar is support for, outreach to Russian society and the Russian people. Everything from student exchanges to support for free media, right? RFERL used to be located in Munich, now it's located in Prague. And in the 21st century, it and we all have a mission. We all have a mission. There are some in Europe and many in the United States who say that support for democracy in Russia is interference in their internal affairs. Well, Russia undertook obligations to respect democracy. And I'm not interested in the arguments that autocracy and assassinations inside Russia have nothing to do with us. They do. Those 4 pillars can be the basis of a common transatlantic strategy, and bring in the UK, bring in the Canadians. Put this together. We can do this. Now, there will be debates about the details, the relative strength of the 4 pillars, how you frame it up, and it may not be 4 pillars. I mean, the French say 2, right? Outreach and pushback. Yeah, fine. My point is that if we want to answer the Russian attacks on us all, the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, assassinations in the UK, in Germany, interference in US, Spanish, and Greek elections, then we need a combined policy, and the Biden administration is ready to do it. I mean, look who they've got. You all know Tony Blinken, and I can tell you from personal experience that he was critical to giving support for the US effort to work with Europe on sanctions against, after Putin's aggression against Ukraine. Toria Nuland, like, do I need to say any more? These are solid people. Karen Dunford has been nominated to be Assistant Secretary for Europe. This is a great team. And President Biden has long been a supporter of Europe whole and free. He supported NATO enlargement in the 1990s. We couldn't have done it without it. He has supported Ukraine. He understands these issues. I think his meeting with Putin is okay because he framed it up on our terms. He didn't pull his punches. He didn't talk about a reset. He didn't suggest that it's all our fault. So this is, you know, my Czech friends have come to us and said, we need solidarity. And they are absolutely right. The best kind of solidarity is strategic solidarity, to come together around a common position. And I welcome the Czechs at that table. This is not pre-1989 Europe, where Eastern Europe could be dismissed. The EU, NATO now represents a fully integrated Europe. And we need to build on that. Anyway, more to say, and Laura Mandeville is probably going to think that I am a typical naively optimistic American. But when Americans, in the years of our wisdom, subtract the Trump 4 years, we always tried to think of what we can do.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Actually, for your optimism, I wouldn't call you naive. You would be the last person who I would call naive, but thank you for your strategic, but also tactical pragmatism and outlining the way forward. I will encourage now also the participants to pose their questions in Q&A. I will start taking questions from the Q&A, and we will have a very rapid lightning round of answers from our speakers. So I would please ask the speakers to keep your intervention and answers to no longer than 2 minutes. And I will start with Ambassador Kur first. We have a couple of questions that concern the expression of solidarity. And the first question is from Yaroslav Mijak, who is very curious about the solidarity within the V4, especially the Czech and Slovak reaction, but also how it compares to the Hungarian reaction, who, as you know, Hungary has been a little bit having different approach towards Russia. And Ambassador, while we have you another maybe 45 seconds, if you could comment on the question, whether Czech-Russian diplomatic relations negatively or maybe not negatively impacting the business interests of Czech companies in Russia.
Thank you for these questions. I'll start with solidarity. Let me start by thanking all the countries who were so quick and showing this solidarity. We were able to benefit from the wave of solidarity from the EU and NATO institutions. Many statements were made by many countries. That was really a great first reaction. Then, of course, following the Salisbury example, there was a wave of sort of more material way of expressing that solidarity. And here Slovakia was really demonstrating that this is our closest friend and much more than a neighboring country. They expelled immediately 3 Russian intelligence officers from Bratislava. Then they were followed by the Baltic countries, who were also very strong from the very first moment. Then we saw the reaction also from Romania in the same direction, so also very grateful, and many other countries. And concerning the expulsion of intelligence officers, many countries had their own stories. Like, for example, in Poland, simultaneously, Poland was expelling the Russian intelligence officers because of the malign activities happening in Poland. Very similar case in the very same period of time was Italy. But of course, we hope that there will be maybe more expression of solidarity in the coming days and weeks. It can take some time, and we believe that still there is a space for this. But as Dan Fried said, this is not just about the number of expelled Russian spies. This is much more strategic issue, and we have to be all united, all very strong, and looking for the ways how to demonstrate to Russia. Frankly, I was in the business around Russia for almost 20 years. If someone would come to me before 2014 and tell me that there will be sanctions against Russia, I think me and all other experts would laugh at that statement, because that was the country we were calling strategic partner, the country which was quite important player with whom NATO was establishing a special formats like NATO-Russia Council, or before Permanent Joint Council. The EU the same. There were the initiative of common strategic spaces, etc. And suddenly the EU and the US, such a powerful geopolitical players, are imposing sanctions against Russia, first after the invasion in Crimea. These were not economic sanctions, but visa ban and asset freeze. But then after downing the plane full of civilian passengers, you remember definitely the NH-17. These were economic sanctions, very powerful move, very strong. Then I agree with Dan Fried also that the 5 principles, the current strategy of the EU towards Russia, is a very powerful tool. Of course, there is a different discussion about the implementation of this powerful tool, how we are able to implement item by item. And of course, the Eastern Partnership and the support for the countries who are at the forefront of this Russian aggressive behavior. That's one of the key issues. And of course, Ukraine is at the center of this, but I mentioned also Georgia. So all these are issues who are to be still developed. I think everyone in the West, I mean, on the level of the key decision makers and the government, recognizes that there is a huge problem. And even the most naive optimists in the international relations, they don't have the argument, because Russia took away this argument from them. And as I said, Russia is ruining its own soft power, and in terms of reputation, committing a suicide in the direct translation. Czechia is one of the chapters, but important and very painful for us, because it cost 2 human lives and of course material damage, but also diplomatically. We saw that the country which signed the treaty on the friendship attacked us. They sent a military unit and made a really very brutal attack. Now the second question was
Ambassador, if
about,
possible, very briefly. Very
brief, yes. You know, the Czech export to Russia is around 2% of total Czech export, 1.8. It depends on the age, but it dropped after the financial crisis. So this is not a sort of strategic and a big deal. Maybe there will be some businesses who will feel the problems from Russia. There will be others who are having the established relations, and where really there is a need on the Russian side for some goods, etc. We are supplying. So I would not see that problem as a absolutely critical one.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And I want to follow up with Yakub Yanda. Yakub, we have a question from the audience, from Jan. The incidents that we are dealing with is in a way easy from the point of view that it's a physical act of aggression, which is pretty visible. But do you think that these physical acts of aggression in fact are utilized to conceal something more malign that's going behind the scenes? And what I mean is, of course, cyber aggression, but also disinformation. How in general, would you assess the Russian spin on the matters, and how Russian disinformation is currently working?
There are multiple layers the Russian government uses to influence individual countries across Europe. One of the major tools is elite capture. The way how Russia uses its proxies to essentially buy political influence and make sure that that political and geopolitical influence stays there longer than individual corrupted politicians. And that's our core problem. That's Nord Stream 2. That's Paktu in Hungary, and that's a Dukovany power plant deal if it would be awarded into Rosatom in the Czech Republic. So those are long-term strategic influence projects, because you could bribe, legally bribe, because essentially buy political influence through that. You can essentially hire dozens of individuals who will be lobbying on behalf of Russian geopolitical interests, as we have seen it, for example, with the German political establishment on Nord Stream 2. And this is on smaller countries like Hungary and Czech Republic, it's very similar. So that's the core of our problem in a nutshell. There is the disinformation operations which are ongoing. They are intelligence operations, not only for espionage as, let's say, stealing classified or sensitive information, but there are intelligence operations which are trying to do physical harm, like this GRU attack on Verbětice, or there are intelligence operations trying to influence local politics in individual European countries, or to some extent help the pro-Kremlin political actors. So that's why I would just return briefly to your previous question. Unfortunately, sitting here in Prague, we see more and more that Viktor Orban and his government in Hungary is essentially an ally of the Kremlin. And we see it in many ways, not only on this Verbětice case. You see it in intelligence area as well, where it's publicly known, or is known at least within the national security establishment here, that there are many Russian operations of Russian intelligence which are run from Hungarian soil, and Hungarian government doesn't have a problem with that. It's against Ukraine, it's against us in Central Europe. So that's our problem here in Central Europe, which so far politically has not and will be addressed, that within our midst there is a NATO and EU member state whose government under Viktor Orban is at least politically, let's say, acting like an ally of the Russian Federation. And if you look over the last 3, 4, 5 years, you see many examples where the Hungarian government does this. I think this should become a major issue in our ally discussions. It has been discussed privately or a bit publicly as well, when Hungary effectively attacked Ukraine and its Euro-Atlantic aspirations. But there are multiple things Hungary does, for example, in Western Balkans, which are hostile to Euro-Atlantic security and which are in direct support of Russian geopolitical interests. So I think this should be one of the key issues for us to discuss, at least in Central European context of the NATO or EU discussions.
Thank you so much, Yakub. And I'll go back to Laura. Laura, we have a question from Helga Kam, which in a way dovetails on your elaboration on the divides within the European Union and how different countries perceive Russia and correspondingly shape their policies towards Russia. So what Helga is wondering about is this relation between the smallness of countries and the size of the knowledge that they possess about Russia. Indeed, and it was also clear in the discussion with Ambassador Fried that even though the countries at the eastern flank of the continents, they may be small in size, but they have decades of experience with Russia. So potentially they do understand the policy of Russia much better than the Western European countries. At the same time, it's the Western countries that often shape the policy. And also, since you're sitting in France currently, I wanted to follow up on what was discussed about the French policy and this two-track approach. Because we all think that the French are probably not tough enough, but what we hear from the French that they think is Europe is tough enough and we do not have enough engagement in Europe. So do you see this learning process happening in the European Union? I mean, that the Western countries are learning and taking the Eastern concerns more seriously, and whether you see that now among the Western countries, specifically France, is it the toughness or engagement that is prevailing?
Yes. So first of all, I want to say that having having covered the end of communism throughout Eastern Europe, and having learned Polish language, not only Russian but Polish language in the 80s and during the state of war, etc., etc. I am a big admirer, actually, of the courage and the extraordinary. Historical courage of these countries, and how and I know to what extent they they have historical knowledge and instinct about, you know, their big neighbor. Of course, these are very complicated relationships, and there are also lots of sympathies actually beyond, you know, the tension, the historical tensions between and understanding, I would say, of Russia throughout these countries, and that's why you see also a disagreement occurring in these countries as well. So this is very, I agree with the person who is raising this question, and I think there has been indeed in many ways over, I would say, the post-communist years, some kind of arrogance in you know, some West European countries, included France, towards their East European neighbors. And you remember the famous sentence by Jacques Chirac telling the Poles they better shut up, etc., etc. So of course it's a very sensitive issue where the French appeared to be right because it was linked with the you know, the war in Iraq, but still I think that it also showed, you know, some kind of, you know, condescendence that is to me very ill-placed. At the same time, you know, of course, these countries have to understand that, you know, the French have their history, they have their vision of geopolitics, and the Germans, because everyone is talking about the French being too mild, but the Germans are defending, you know, the Nord Stream route very aggressively, and they, you know, the German business is very much, you know, weighing on German attitudes towards Russia. So, but concerning the French, I think that you have, of course, the historical, I would say, love affair between France and Russia as a sort of alliance which was to counter historically Germany. And there are lots of, you know, sentiments have remained. And when we, you know, you had Voltaire, then you had Diderot, and then de Gaulle, and then now you have the neo-Gaullists, you have the nationalists, you have the extreme right, you have even part of the left, which, because they are anti-American, and this sort of a grouping of constituents, of different constituencies, which are expressing some kind of willingness to be good to Russia, to extend a hand to Russia, to sort of strike some kind of relationship, strategic relationship still with Russia. These sentiments don't be, you know, fooled. They exist in France and they exist throughout Europe, and they are in some ways, I would say, growing. And that's, I'm going back to what I was saying at the beginning, is because of precisely because of the huge problems, internal problems that we are facing. I would say that, you know, this sort of fascination that you see in some quarters in France or otherwise in Austria and other countries towards Putin, they are the sort of fascination of the strong man, are the result of our own impotence in many ways to deal with the problems that we have and that have nothing to do with Russia. And I think we have to be aware that this is a huge, you know, vulnerability that we have now when we're dealing with Russia, because of course we have to be tough, but we have to understand that a lot of people, lots of people in the West, in Europe, throughout Europe, and have been, you know, traveling a lot throughout Europe to sort of study the sentiments throughout the continent, and there is a growing disconnect between the elite and the people, and part of the people, they just don't trust us on many issues, and they start not trusting us also on what we should think about Russia, and that we have to take into account. And I think we have to work on that too, in terms of informing and giving a truthful picture of what's happening in Russia. And I would say that according to me, there is a weak coverage, I would say, in some way, of what's going on inside Russia. Because to convince our people, I would say in the West, of what is that Russia is a danger, you have to be able to cover the dynamic inside the country. Otherwise, you don't understand. If you only explain to the people that they are destabilizing, small incidents, even if they are big in some countries, I am not sure it will be enough to sort of shift the opinion. And we're talking really of a battle of information, as has been mentioned by different speakers here, and rightly so. And so we have to do this work. And I want also to stress that I totally agree with the idea that Russia is not a monolith, and what Dan Fried, Ambassador Fried, said about the fact we have to be very tough on protecting sovereignty of our partners, but also reach to Russian society. And because you have people who absolutely disagree with what's going on in Russia and think that somehow their future has been hijacked by the current regime, and they want a different path for Russia, and we have to be in touch. I think the visa policy for Europe especially is very important for students. Once the COVID is out of our out of the horizon, we have to go back to some kind of really involvement here. Very important. We can't just go on the big stick. The big stick is obviously needed, but not only.
Thank you so much, Laure. And I will try to sneak in one more question to Ambassador Fried, which should be an easy one because it's very specific. Ambassador, you talked as one of your pillars about the need to go after the money, cut off the financial flows. So David Vitus wants to know how exactly we do that. How can we cut Russian access to Western economies? Of course, there are options like cutting off Russia from SWIFT, and anonymity in the banks. What else in practice can we do?
Sanctions are not the same as financial transparency and anti-corruption moves. And of course, we have additional options with respect to financial sanctions, but I think we have not developed a financial transparency and anti-corruption measures sufficiently. I think we can do that. And I think it starts with pooling our information and understanding that this is not simply a finance ministry issue, it is also a national security issue. And we need to pool our information and go after the flows of dirty money. And now there's not a lot of time, so I'll keep the answer brief, but this is one of the things that the Americans, the EU, the British, and others should be dealing with in coordinated fashion. We can do this.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And since you were so brief, I have 100 seconds to ask each of you for one final question. What would be your one final recommendations towards Western societies and how the reaction to Russia should be structured? Ambassador Kurfürst, you go first.
Maybe first to name the problem by its proper names. Second, to build the resilience of the society, but not to use resilience as a buzzword, but as a practical, concrete activity. Information space, resilient defense, etc. And then to support the countries which are on the forefront, like Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and others.
Thank you so much. Yakub?
We should respond with deterrence by punishment, as we are not doing it. Because anytime Russia puts an aggressive act inside of European countries, or EU countries, let's say, the response is very, very symbolic. It does not hurt the Russian regime. We are not putting people, real important people on sanctions list. We are not actually cutting down their presence here in Europe. We are actually not making harm or punishment to people who caused it or who are closed as proxies or enablers. Once we start doing it, there might be less aggressive actions against us. If we don't do it, they will continue because it's for free, and it's free shooting, and that's what it is. Now, so that's our problem as European allies, I'm afraid.
Thank you so much. Laure?
I would say put our house in order, support our friends in Eastern Europe, and support our friends in Russia.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Fried.
All of the above. I like all of the suggestions. And remember that we thought we were losing the Cold War until the second half of the 1980s. We should have more faith in ourselves and our institutions. But as Laura Mandeville says, for God's sakes, get to work. Make our democracies work better for our people. And then we can do this. Thanks for this opportunity. It's great.
Thank you so much to all the speakers and to all the participants for being part of this event and of course for caring about the issues. Our friends from the Atlantic Council are going to be issuing a short paper on the Czech case and the responses to it, and it's going to be authored by Peter Tuma and should be available to all of you today or tomorrow. So I encourage you to read it and to follow the events of the Atlantic Council and of course all the great work that they are doing. Thank you so much once again, and we hope to see you soon at other occasions.